East Montana. The first 6 miles into Montana, I found this little gas station called Welcome Stop. I deserved another snack for making yet one more stepping stone on my journey. There was an area with tables where I could rest and enjoy my little Debbies. I was surprised that they had Wi-Fi and was relieved to have the opportunity to make a phone call after such a tough few days. I called my friend Michael in South Carolina to vent about the hardship of the last few weeks on the road, and we laughed about how stupid it all was. He encouraged me with some kind words and believed that I could finish this thing. Montana is the widest state next to Texas, just shy of 700 miles across. It is a part of the American Cycling Association's Northern Tier bicycling route. The implications of that involve quite a few things. First, I would meet fellow cycling friends, people who are motivated to take on this enduring task of pedaling across the country for fun. It also meant kind-hearted and hospitable small towns. Nearly every town I went through had free camping in the city park, and the citizens were excited to hear about our adventures. The public parks had a restroom available to use. I always felt safe where I slept and felt taken care of. The other side of this equation was that I put in excruciatingly long rides on some of the year's hottest days. It was now the end of July, and the first 4 or 5 days in the state were pushing 100 degrees. It wouldn't go below 85 even at night, and I'd be sweating my balls off. Here we go. I was jaded by the barren prairie of the north. I was only trying to fulfill the promise to myself that I needed to make it to the end. If I could keep pedaling, I would make it. That doesn't mean it felt good. I felt like I was mindlessly surviving. I ate food solely for the practicality of keeping my body pedaling. Since I was sweating and riding so hard, the fuel I put into my body was spent considerably faster than usual. I usually found a gas station or restaurant every 30 to 40 miles, which helped tremendously. There was always a point in the day where the water I carried got above a comfortable resting temperature, and I craved anything cold. I would buy Gatorade and seltzer water to go with my coffee. Double and triple fisting is what helped me survive the Big Sky state. I practically ate 4 full meals a day. One day, I stopped at a Pizza Hut and ate an entire stuffed crust pizza with a pitcher of Dr. Pepper after a 100-mile ride. My original plan was to ride 50 to 80 miles a day. As I met more cyclists on the road, they told me where they stayed and what amenities were available. I pushed 15 to 25 miles further every day just to get to these cycling paradises. I hated the prairie by this point and needed to get out of it as fast as possible. I had ridden 2,800 miles in 41 days since Portland, Maine. On my second day, I rode through a reservation that had a gas station. I met a guy inside the store wearing a camo jacket who couldn't have been older than 19. He asked if I was riding the bike outside, and I told him how I'd come from San Diego. His eyes lit up to hear about my adventure, and he explained how he wished he could do something like that in his life. He didn't think he was capable because he was addicted to cigarettes, and they affected his breathing. I tried encouraging him that he could make it happen if he found the motivation inside himself. He paid for all the snacks I had in my hands and congratulated me on getting this far. I wasn't able to thank him enough for such a kind gesture. In the town of Glasgow, I decided to take a day off after getting ahead of schedule. I woke up early and hung out at a coffee shop close to my campsite. This town wasn't more than 3 miles long anyways, so everything was close. I showed up around 7 a.m. and they had just opened. The owner was behind the counter, and the interior had a handful of tables and booths. I grabbed a coffee, then settled in to catch up on my journal and beat the heat outside. I got going for a while and noticed an older woman in a very cute dress enter the shop. She asked the barista if she had something sweet, and I butted in to tell her she should try a chai latte. After ordering, she came over to sit next to me and we got to chatting. Her name was Karen, and she was also bicycling across the country. She started in Portland and was heading to her hometown in Michigan. It was fascinating to hear her life story and learn about the ride she was doing. She built a custom bike and started heading east, but found the wildfire smoke was putting a damper on her health. She was taking a couple days off to figure out how to take a train to Minnesota and then continue to Michigan. She let me use her motel room shower before she dipped out of town that afternoon. She would visit Kansas City 2 years later, and I got to show her around my home turf. I planned to stay in the town of Dodson. I arrived and found out there was nothing there, barely even a sign saying Dodson, only a couple houses and a grain elevator. I noticed a guy parked at the front of his driveway next to the highway. He had all the windows down on his 80s two-door Toyota, and his driver's side door was open. He was dancing and flailing around. As I got closer, I realized he was listening to EDM on full blast and jamming out super hard. I was all about the energy, but I don't think he was stoked on me from the look of his glaring stink eye. A little further down the road, I found a bridge offering shade. I wanted to take a break to eat lunch, so I climbed underneath and sat next to the little stream, which gave me a perfect natural AC. Not too long after, I met a cyclist on the road who suggested that I stay in the town of Harlem that night. I wasn't immediately sold because it would add 50 miles for the day. After checking the weather, I saw this was the coolest day of the week. All of a sudden, 50 miles didn't sound that bad. I rolled into town just before 8 p.m. I saw the public pool, and behind it was 15 cyclists with tents pitched. Harlem was a part of the ACA route and an overnight destination for cyclists going cross-country. I went up to the group and started talking to this guy, Reese. He told me I could shower in the pool bathrooms and that they opened the city building's front door at night so we could use the toilets. I was surprised at how accommodating the city seemed to be towards travelers. Reese was with a handful of other people who came from Astoria, Oregon, to ride all the way to D.C. Another couple was following the Lewis and Clark route along the Missouri River. Someone said they met a guy riding the U.S. perimeter on a recumbent bike. It was nice to hear about all these other adventures. It made me feel normal instead of a crazy guy doing something no one would ever want to do. At 9:30, the sun finally went down and we decided to turn in for some shut-eye. Due to the extended mileage I was making, I was on a regimented schedule of 5 a.m. wake-up call every day. Unfortunately, not even the gas stations would open until 7 a.m. I survived off nuts and pretzels for the first couple hours each day. My last day before the mountains brought me to Shelby, Montana. It was only 42 miles from Harlem, and I got to admire the beautiful golden sunrise on my way. Scattered, blazing rays of light came from behind the white clouds and forced their way into daylight. There was no wind for the first 2 hours of riding, and I felt limber to get there as fast as possible. I saw 3 cyclists riding in the opposite direction at one point and went over to their side of the road to talk. Admittedly, I stopped them in their tracks, but I was excited to meet as many cyclists as possible. They followed the adventure cycling route and seemed to be a motley crew. One guy was quiet and reserved, the woman was nice and friendly, and there was one controlling alpha male. They were all in their 60s, and I asked them about their experience riding and where they came from. The lady seemed to be loving the conversation. The macho man butted in to make an executive decision that they couldn't wait any longer and needed to take full advantage of the tailwind. We didn't hang out even for 5 minutes, but I tried not to take it personally. I got to Shelby at 10:30 a.m. and scoped the area to get a beat on the town. They had an Amtrak station and a cute main street with plenty of businesses. They seemed to take pride in being a tourist trap. There were signs pointing to local amenities like a pool and the library. I also noticed neon signs pointing to different restaurants and shops. It was a cute place of only a few thousand residents, the last stop before Glacier National Park. The cyclists I had met earlier recommended that I eat at this place called The Griddle. I found it off the main drag and grabbed a booth inside. It had very tall ceilings and brown booths. Everything felt like a 1970s cafeteria. My server was heavy-set and wearing a flat bill hat with a t-shirt that said, "You're killing me, Smalls." He seemed to not really care what anybody thought of him. I was all about that energy. I ordered eggs, hash browns with gravy, and a 12-inch pancake. A group of women sat behind me speaking in heavy German accents. They tried to order a beer and got really bummed when they were told, "Beer is not served at the Griddle." All my food showed up at one time, and I slowly conquered the massive carb load. I was concerned I wouldn't be able to finish all the food, but I cleaned my plate, and still felt I could take on another pancake even. I decided to find the library. It's always the most accessible place to hang out for hours and charge my electronics without buying anything. When I arrived, an employee told me it didn't open for another hour and a half, but I could sit outside and use the Wi-Fi in the meantime. I took a seat on a bench and connected myself to the ether. Not even 5 minutes later, this random guy walked out of the shadows of the trees and started talking to me unwarranted. He asked if I'm traveling and then started talking to me about all this crazy stuff. He had long gray hair and seemed to be in his late 50s. He told me how he inherited a fortune from his father, who had worked in the oil fields for 50 years. He explained how the government was trying to steal his money and that he lived off the grid. I realized he was a conspiracy theorist. He said he'd been kidnapped multiple times and his kids had also been kidnapped. He boasted about lawsuits against him, not only by the state of Montana, but a handful of cities within the state. He told me there was 28 microchips in his body that people were tracking him with, and that the moon landing was faked. He was an encyclopedia of wild conspiracies. I told him that I do video for a living, and he offered to hook me up with his Hollywood friend who could make us rich. He said he had already written many scripts, and all we needed was a production company and backing from the right people. He told me his @juno.com email address and asked me to contact him through an anonymous email and to only describe myself by color. When the library finally opened, he headed in to use the computers, and I immediately left to go to a coffee shop. That guy was just too much for me. The coffee shop was called the Prairie Peddler. It was a cute little spot that I presumed was referring to cycling due to my confirmation bias. I was swiftly corrected by the owner that it meant peddling goods. The room was divided with a seating area on one side and had a selection of home goods, decorations, and Montana-themed art on the other. It felt cozy, and I was happy to have checked it out. 2 women were running the shop, and I told them I appreciated the way they set it up and asked about the history of the place. One of them had kept it open for 30 years and was currently trying to sell the business to move and be closer to family elsewhere in the state. I ordered a coffee before sitting down, and they gave me an entire French press. I didn't need that much coffee, but it was an excellent excuse to hang out until they closed. They were very kind for allowing me a safe place to loiter. I left at 5 p.m. and noticed a guy driving a VW bus down the block. He had a Thule roof rack and a touring bike on top, so I knew he was a fellow adventurer. I found out he was heading west from New Jersey. He decided to peace out of his 9-to-5 job, bought the VW bus, and decided to drive until the van died or he ran out of money. I told him I was heading to Glacier the next day and asked if I could hitch a ride with him to the mountain to save a day of riding. He obliged, and we threw my bike into the cramped kitchenette in the back. I was trying to be friendly, but kept the conversation light. He never told me his name. I would later find out this is common among nomads. You don't get too personal and usually come up with a pseudonym. He explained that his van had been breaking down every day because of trouble with a cylinder not firing. The drive was only 70 miles, but we were capped at 40 miles an hour due to the engine issues. After a few stops of adjusting the carburetor, we started to see the glorious mountain landscape. Glacier's jagged edges and snow-capped peaks were beaming in front of the sunset's golden aura. We rolled into East Glacier Village around 8 p.m. It was a small tourist area that took advantage of people's pockets before entering the national park. There were cute Dutch-style buildings and plenty of fudge shops. Oh God, fudge. I wished my traveling buddy the best and unpacked to find a place to sleep for the night. I wasn't getting any phone service, so I went to an ice cream shop 30 minutes before they closed to use the Wi-Fi. The teenager running the counter seemed frustrated as she wrote down the random 30-character password on a napkin for me. I found a campground on the edge of town and had to fork out $22 to sleep on rocks. The good news is they had a bathroom with showers. I set up my camp that lay at the base of the mountain and watched the sharp peaks disappear slowly into the dark void. A guy staying in a camper across from me saw my bike and came over to hand me a Miller Lite. He introduced himself and was ecstatic to hear about what I was doing. Having some human interaction after such a long couple of weeks was nice. We only talked 10 minutes before I hit the shower and dove into my tent for a decent night's rest. As I wound down for the night, I wondered how I had made it this far. I no longer have any concept of time.